Kevin, congratulations on launching keviniole.com.
Thank
You've
you.
created your own YouTube channel 11 years ago and have always interviewed the top people in boxing and MMA. But how has the process been for you in terms of now having to seemingly 100% focus on your own media company, completely based around you as the brand?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely different. Like I created the YouTube channel and I never really took it seriously. And I started it and then I was at Yahoo Sports for so long. We started doing video there. So the channel sat dormant for a number of years where I did nothing with it. And then in January, when I started keviniole.com, it was a change for me. I had to learn a lot of stuff, and I'm still learning, right? And it's a process. But the website creation and design and that work was all familiar. So I was able to create the site the way I wanted it to look, the way I wanted it to feel, what I wanted to cover. When I first started, I had not only boxing and MMA, but I had power slap and bare knuckle fighting. And maybe I wasn't fair and didn't give it enough time, but I kind of dropped bare knuckle fighting because I just felt like it wasn't resonating with the audience, right? And I said, I'm going to be pretty busy and I got a lot of stuff to do. And while they were saying it was popular and growing, I wasn't seeing that on my site. Now, that was at a time when I had just launched the site and it was, I wasn't doing a lot of traffic at that point. So maybe I was too quick to pull the plug on it, but I decided to focus on other things, and mainly, which is obviously boxing and MMA. And so it's been a process, and I've been learning, and my traffic has been going up, and my YouTube channel, I just hired an intern who's really been good to help me, and I'm going to probably hire one more intern. And eventually I want to get to a point where I can have an employee or two or three. But I'm going to do it smart, and I'm not going to do it. The first year especially, I want to brand it about me. So for good or for bad, I have a reputation in the industry, and I've been around a long time, and so I want people, to when they come to my site, they know what they're going to get. Eventually, I'm going to go expand outside of that. So it's just I'm thinking long term, but right now, acting short term, right?
Yeah. So you're going to bring people in to maybe cover events and things for you in places that you don't want to travel to, or like ridiculously far away, like Australia tonight and things
Well,
like that.
a week ago, Saturday was a great example. There were 3 fight cards that I would have covered had I been able to do that. Top Rank had a boxing match, which, potentially had the knockout of the year in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I would have covered that at the very least off of television. But that was on head to head with DAZN. They had a Golden Boy show, Virgil Ortiz fight, which was in Las Vegas, was a great show. And then UFC was in Las Vegas. So I'm in a situation where these shows are all going on simultaneously. At least the UFC and the Virgil Ortiz fight kind of came one after the other. But the Top Rank show and the Virgil Ortiz show are on, head to head. So if I had another person, I could say, okay, you cover the show in New Mexico, I'll cover the shows in Las Vegas, and we get everything covered. That's what I want to get to at some point.
Yeah, makes sense. It's everything's so spread out, and you've got competing schedules. So before you have gone kind of all in on building on this brand of keviniole.com, before that, obviously, you had a long history with Yahoo Sports. How did that kind of begin? I know you were doing newspapers before that, but how did you move? How did the Yahoo relationship begin? I
Yeah.
think 9 years ago or however long ago it was.
Yeah, it was 17 years ago. So
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I was at the Las Vegas Review-Journal newspaper, and I was covering boxing and MMA there. And there was a guy I knew, and he said to me, "Do you know Dave Morgan?" And Dave Morgan was the assistant sports editor at the time at the Los Angeles Times. And that was at a time when the newspapers were still big at that point. They were declining, but they were still big at that point. And the LA Times might have had the best sports section in the world. They had so many great writers, including Jim Murray was still alive at that time. And Jim Murray, to me, is the best sports writer who ever lived. And Dave Morgan was the number 2 on the staff. Well, he had left in late 05 to go to start Yahoo Sports. So early 06, I got called by a friend, said, you know Dave Morgan? And I said, yes. And he said, he's interested in hiring you for Yahoo Sports. And so I called Dave, and I knew of Dave, but I didn't personally know him. And then we got together, and that's sort of how it started. And Dave and I have remained friends. So it was a great relationship. And, we had an unbelievable staff. When I started at Yahoo, he put together an amazing staff. A lot of them are now at ESPN. Adrian Wojnarowski was there. Jeff Passan, who's the ESPN baseball writer, was there. Mike Silver, who now is a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, he was there. So yeah, we had an unbelievable. Dan Wetzel, of course, is still at Yahoo, and we had an amazing staff.
Yeah. Okay. So long history there, long history in general, right? With sports journalism. How has social media changed that for you? Obviously, it's brought in good and bad. For you personally, what's it changed?
Well, it is bad because, and from the standpoint that you get a lot of crazy rumors, and you get a lot of, there's always this crazy stuff going on, and 90% of it is false.
Mm.
But you have to check things out, make sure it's accurate. People try to trick you, and they put, stuff out, and, so there's all this, you have to be really, really, really careful. But it's good that, the other thing is, you never know. There could be, like in the old days, there was never a chance of a story being broken just by some guy in a gym. But now, he might be in the gym, and a fighter's working out next to him, and he says, "What's your next fight?" And the fighter says, "I'm fighting so and so," and this guy tweets it out. And, he happened to be in the gym next to the guy, and he has a way to get that information out. And, so it's very, it's good and it's bad. I mean, I like the democratization, and it gives a voice to voiceless, but a lot of people don't, take their voice seriously, and they don't realize how significant it is. And there's people who try to be nasty. And so there's like a lot of good and a lot of bad at the same time, but it's made it a lot more work for us. But it's also taken a lot of, and opened the doors for people who maybe had specific interests, right? Like me, when I started back, I was in high school in the 70s. I wanted to be a journalist, and I wanted to be a sports journalist. But am I going to sit here and tell you, yes, I wanted to be a combat sports journalist on day one? No, that's not true. I got into it. I loved combat sports even before I got into it, but that's not what I wanted to be. But now, if you're a combat sports fan, you can go out there, and you have talent. You start your own site. People can see you. People can read what you have to say, and you can make an impact. So there, there's like both sides of it, and I appreciate both sides of it. I hate the people that act like they have all this knowledge, and and they're, I mean, it's great now. People say what the fighter should be getting paid, and what the pay-per-view is going to be, when they have no basis of knowledge. But it's also good because it gives a voice to the voiceless, and gives people a chance to say what they want to say.
Yeah, I think also what you touched on there is also, so news now moves faster, and fake news unfortunately also moves at the same speed. So you got to really trust the source a lot more, because there's so much nonsense, right?
Yeah, and like, I'll tell you a story that happened, like, and this is always like, how do you double check things? And this was years ago, but this happened, but it was, internet stuff related. I had covered, I think it was UFC 101 in Philadelphia. And there was a fighter on the card who had lost to Anderson Silva, and the next fight fights in Philadelphia and loses a fight on that card. So Dana White is asked at the post-fight press conference, is this fighter going to get cut? And Dana says, no, we don't cut somebody just for losing a fight, blah, 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 blah. So Monday morning, I'm sitting at home, and I'm reading the internet, and I see MMA Junkie, and they have a story that says this fighter got cut.
Right.
I'm like, Dana White just said on Saturday night, after the fight, that the guy didn't get cut. So I called Dana White, and I said, Dana, you said Saturday night this fighter wasn't going to get cut, but I see a story now that says he's cut. What's going on? And I don't know who was next to him, but he said to somebody in the room, "Did we cut so and so?" And the person said no. And then Dana goes, "Yeah, no, we didn't cut him. Blah 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 blah." So I write a story saying so and so was reported to be cut, but Dana White says he's not cut. Well, as it turns out, he was cut. And what
Ah,
had happened is the matchmaker, he wasn't like Dana handled all the main guys and, the lower guys, the match. So the matchmaker, Joe Silva, had cut him, but just had not informed Dana yet. Right.
ah,
And so the internet, here was a case of the internet has a story that you see. And, I said, "Hey, wow, this is true." I thought it was true because that was before MMA Junkie was owned by USA Today, but I knew the people that owned MMA Junkie. I knew their credibility, and I thought, hey, if they're reporting it, this must be true.
yeah,
Then I go to Dana, who is the number one source here, Dana White, and he tells me it. And so then I write that, and it turns out, that I had a mistake. So then I had to rejigger it. So that's kind of crazy how that stuff sort of happened.
yeah. And that's misinformation before social media was even a problem, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So imagine what it's like now.
No doubt.
So there'll be people that might watch this and they'll see you at the live events and they'll think, I love MMA. I'm obsessed with MMA or boxing. And they want to be in the position you're in, where they see you kind of cage side all the events, and then they see the fighters go by afterwards, and they kind of acknowledge you because you've built this relationship with them over various years. How would you advise someone to get from fan but passionate to your position if that was their desire? What would be your advice to do, and maybe not what not to do?
Well, don't be a fan, number one, but there's a couple different things, right? So again, the best way is always to go to journalism school, right? Get the classic training and learn from the inside, because you're going to learn so much in journalism school. But real world experience also has it. So, if journalism school, if you're older, if it's not a possibility for you, if you don't want to do that, create your own website. It's easy, it's free, you can do it, or it's cheap. And then I think start, go to a show and do what we do, write your story afterwards. You can hear the interviews, hey, like if I don't actually go to a fight and I watch off of TV, how do I get the quotes? Well, I listen to the interviews in the octagon, or I watch the post-fight press conference, and I write from that. If I'm there, I can ask questions, and you can do reporting on scene. And it's always better when you're on scene because you can get more in depth and you have a better, understanding of everything. But you can do the job remotely, and so watch the shows on TV and write, and put yourself on deadline, because most of the news sites, they have deadlines, right? We're not just saying now that I'm at keviniole.com for the first time in my life, I'm on my own deadline. I'm my boss, and when I decide to get it up. But you know what? I'll tell you this. Like what was it? UFC 304 in Manchester. So the fight card ended, and I go to my CMS, my content management system, and I'm waiting for the post-fight. I wasn't at the event. I'm waiting for the post-fight press conference to begin online. And I'm looking, and I have a huge amount of traffic on my site. So it was 000. Then the fight ends, and now I have this big amount of traffic. So people are coming to the site, and they're looking for what I said about the show. And I wasn't ready to write anything because the press conference hasn't started and it hasn't there. So it took a long time for the fighters to get to the press conference, right? Dana came right away. The fighters didn't get there right away. So when I wanted to write, I couldn't write, and so I lost a lot of traffic because I waited, until I got the full story. When I was at Yahoo, I used to always write a very quick story. And like a lot of people, my most read story when I was at Yahoo a lot of times was the one that I wrote the quickest and was my worst work. And what would happen was the fight would end, and like we would decide this beforehand, but let's say there's a co-main event and a main event that are title fights. So I would say to my boss, okay, I will send you running stories. And as soon as the fight ended, I would write, I'd have to have 400 words, and I'd have a story in before the next fight began. And if it was the last fight of the night, I had to have it in within 6 minutes, right? So if you're a person sitting at home, try to do what I did. Sit there and say, okay, I'm going to write a story in 6 minutes. and it's got to, it's got to be able to be published and quality work, right? It's difficult. And, we all make mistakes, and you'll learn from those mistakes because when you go back and read it. But I think just doing a little bit of everything, Simon, is the way that you should do it, because, you may find you're good at something, most people want to put their opinion in it, right? That's what everybody wants. They want to be a columnist. That's what I am. I'm a columnist. I was a columnist at Yahoo, but in this day and age, you're a columnist. Sometimes you have to report. As you report a story as straight news, sometimes you have to report news to write your column, right? There's all these things going on. But I think for people just beginning, your opinion doesn't matter. If you haven't been around a long time, the world doesn't care. Your wife or your girlfriend or your best friend may care about your opinion, but nobody else does, right? They want to know the information, and write a good story, and write an accurate story, and write a fair story. Later, if you get experience, you can try to, put your opinion into things and write a piece that way. But it's crazy. I have a lot of journalism students who'll reach out to me on social media, and, they'll say, hey, will you critique what I wrote, and will you do this? And I'll say, yeah, of course I'll do it. And I'll say, how do you want me to critique you? Do you want me to critique you like I'm going to critique me? Or do you want me to critique you like, you're a beginner and whatever? And then I'll say, what are your goals? And invariably they say, I want to be you, right? They want to be a columnist. They want to do, and that's the thing that, is going to be the hardest to get, because there's fewer columnists anywhere. And like ESPN doesn't even have columnists, right? So if your goal is to go to ESPN, don't be a columnist.
That makes a lot of sense. I did it once. I did press row for Bellator in London when it was Rory McDonald versus Paul Daly. And having done it once, I don't think I would ever want to go back to just being in the crowd, because it's so much more civilized. Like, you have your laptop on the table, you can just go get a drink. It's so much more like chilled, Would you, could you imagine now, like if you stopped doing that, would you still want to attend a fight as a regular person in the crowd, or has a kind of lifestyle of having that access meant that you would probably not enjoy it as much anymore, right? To be just Joe Bloggs in the crowd.
I love the fights, right? I love watching the fights. But I also love what I do for a living. So how long do I do this, right? I don't know. At some point I'm going to want to retire, but like right now, I'm not ready to retire. I am happy, and I enjoy going to work every day. My life has changed a little bit in the way I go about my work compared to how I did it when I was at Yahoo. And I'm tweaking it every day, and I'm always trying to figure better ways of doing things. But like I could see myself, if I retire, going to the fights and sitting in the stands and watching the shows and just cheering on the fighters. Like right now, we are fans of that action, right? And I think there are some reporters who root for certain fighters, and they're not supposed to do that, right? You're supposed to be neutral. There are some people who do that, and that gets into what we talked about before. But, like I want to see good fights. And so, sometimes, as John Morgan and I laugh, because we usually sit side by side at the fights, and we're usually dead center on the octagon. So we're on camera a lot when these things are going on. And there's like Demetrius Johnson had that flying armbar on, who was it? Ray Borg, I think it was, right? And you see me, and I went like this, and I was actually at that fight, I was sitting next to Brett Okamoto. And we both laughed about it later, because you see, and we watched the replay up on the big screen, and you see, me having that reaction, so we get excited. The Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje fight at UFC 300. When Max did that, and then had the faceplant knockout. We're going, oh my God! We're sitting there. So we're not rooting for specific outcomes. We're just rooting for crazy, exciting outcomes, right?
Yeah, that's fair. I think the whole world had that same reaction for both those fights. It's like craziness. When did you first start covering the UFC? Was it pre-Zuffa?
So as a fan, I watched. So I was at the Las Vegas Review Journal when the UFC was created. I was covering boxing. There was another gentleman who had been covering boxing for a long time at the paper there. His name was Royce Fuhr. He subsequently passed, but he had worked at the Review Journal. He was born and raised in Las Vegas, got hired at a young age, and he worked at the Review Journal for probably 40 years, and he covered boxing for most of that time. So he and I at that time were both covering boxing. So I was trying to find other things to do. So like I covered K1 when it came to Las Vegas every year. That's how I met Scott Coker. Scott
Okay.
Coker was the promoter of K1 in Las Vegas, right? They would have, before the World Grand Prix, they came to Las Vegas, and I met Scott Coker doing that. So I watched the first couple UFCs as a fan, and I should just throw this aside in. The UFC was created around the same time that Tough Man contest was created. And I don't know, if everybody remembers that, but there was that Tough Man contest where literally they would pick people out of the crowd. And like you and I were sitting in the crowd, we'd say, hey, we want to fight each other. And they would put us in the ring and, and we would go at it. And so there was a lot of people at the beginning that thought that's what UFC was, right? So I watched UFC 1 through maybe 5 or 6 as a fan. And then whatever, somebody can look this up, whatever UFC it was where Emmanuel Yarbrough fought Keith Hackney. Yarbrough was 600 pounds. Hackney was 190 pounds. And I'm like, what the hell is this? It's like pro wrestling. We got a 190 pounder against a 600 pounder.
I
And
think
I
that
said,
was
hey,
one of the first 5 UFCs, wasn't it?
yeah, it
Or
was one of
one
the
of the,
early ones, right?
yeah.
I think it was 5 or 6, maybe even 7, whichever one it was. I just said, this is pro wrestling and I'm not going to watch this, right? And so I went away from it. Then it was in late 99, early 2000. Mark Ratner, who is now at the at the UFC, was at the
Hmm.
Nevada Athletic Commission at the time. And he said to me that I ought to look into covering UFC because it was going to become legal in Nevada and I ought to do it. So I actually went to a show in Louisiana, and I didn't write it as fights. I wrote it more as like I did a scene setting. And so it was still owned by the previous owners prior to Zuffa. But the first card that I covered actually as a reporter covering the fights was a Zuffa show in Vegas.
Okay.
So
I
that would have been
saw on
UFC 31, I think it was.
So UFC 31 is when you started covering it. Was that pre Zuffa? Because I didn't.
That was the second Zuffa show. They
Okay.
did one. They did one in New Jersey, and I think it might have been the second or third. I don't remember exactly,
Okay.
but it was their first one in Vegas. And so at that time, nobody really knew what the hell UFC was. So when I'm saying, I did the show in Louisiana that was maybe 28, and it was before Zuffa.
Okay.
And I just kind of did what's the scene like and that type of thing. And then, I finally started covering it. They called the show Victory in Vegas. So whatever show that was, and it
Okay.
was supposed to be Tito Ortiz and Belfort, and it ended up being Tito Ortiz and Matt Yushenko.
Okay. Nice. That's a good one to go to. Um, I saw on the Prince of Fresh Air podcast that you said you met Dana in the mid '90s. Um, so that was pre Zuffa, right? That was when Dana was just in boxing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I met Dana, and I would see him a lot. I used to go to the Golden Gloves gym in Las Vegas, which no longer exists, but at the time was one of the 2 really popular gyms among pro boxers. And that's where Mike Tyson trained, and that was close to the newspaper where I worked. So I used to walk over to see Mike train a lot, and then you would see other people, and so that's why I would go over there. And when I first met Dana, one day Dana was going to be a trainer. Then another day Dana was going to fight himself. And then another day he was going to be a referee. I walked in and there was 2 guys sparring, and Dana was in the ring, and he was a ref, and he was thinking about becoming a referee. And but the one thing about Dana, whatever he was doing, he had a guy that was going to fight amateurs. This was probably like 96. It ended up fought Fernando Vargas in one of the qualifiers for the Olympics and lost to Fernando Vargas. But, Dana was like, oh, this guy's great. He's going to go to the Olympics. Dana was always a promoter, right? And even one day, there was a gym I was working at. It was during the O.J. Simpson trial. I remember that. I would be watching the trial when I'm working out, and the gym was 2 stories. There was like a aerobic studio downstairs in a pool, and then you would go upstairs and where's all the weights and the cardio equipment and everything. And Dana used to do a box aerobics class in that aerobics gym, and I would come in and he had hair then. And he would have one of those little microphones on that would be taped on the side of your face and everything. And I would pass him every day as he was waiting for his class to start. And he's like pitching me to write a story about it. It's the most unique class there is. You should write it for the paper. And I wasn't going to write that, but I mentioned it to somebody else, and we had a running and fitness person at the paper who wrote a story about it because Dana pitched me and I pitched the guy, right? But that's how Dana and I got to know each other.
So he was even being a promoter back then, but promoting
Always.
boxing classes, exercise classes.
Yeah. Always.
It was in the DNA, right? It seems like there's a lot of mutual respect between you and Dana. You can tell from afar, as someone who just watches the post-fight. I've watched every post-fight press conference I think there's ever been on, especially after a pay-per-view. And it always seems like when you're there and you have something to say, and maybe you're pushed back a bit more than other people, and he respects your opinion. It comes across more than perhaps other people in the room. And then when you left Yahoo, he backed you publicly on Instagram, and it feels like there's a lot of mutual respect. Where do you think that's come from? Is it just the longevity of your relationship, and that he just knows what you're talking about?
Well, I think that the main thing is that he knows that I'm fair, right? I will say, so people don't always agree with my opinion. Believe me, I know that. But whatever my opinion is what I'm going to say. Like when he had the incident with Loretta Hunt many, many years ago, and he did a video where he really was nasty and ripped her and everything, I wrote a column and I blasted the shit out of him. But after I wrote the column, but before it was published, I called him and said, "Hey, I wrote this column ripping you. I want to give you a chance to defend yourself, right? You can make a comment, and address anything." And he chose not to in that particular case, right? But I think Dana knows that the one thing that I can say about myself with 100% certainty is that I'm fair with whoever no matter what my feelings were. And I'll tell you a story about John Jones in a second, but no matter what my personal feelings were towards somebody, when I'm sitting down to write, I'm doing the best I possibly can to be as fair as I can. Now, when I'm taking an opinion, that the person, if I'm on the opposite side of them, they may think I'm being unfair because I took an opinion. But I'm trying to be as accurate with the facts and say, okay, based on these facts, this is my opinion. And I try to, say what I think. So I think, you're saying, why does Dana show me respect? Because he knows that whether he agrees with my opinion or disagrees, I am not he thinks, and I disagree with him on this. And you might have heard me say to him on my YouTube interview recently about the reporter in Manchester who asked him about the flags. I said, is there not a chance that this person really was just asking you a question? I would have, if that had come up in a different time on that particular interview, I had a hard out at 30 minutes, and I knew 30 minutes, boom, we were done and he was gone. And so when that came up, I had my timer up on the corner of my screen, and I knew I didn't have a lot of time left. So I did push back on that and try to ask him about it. But, he has that natural, he's wary of everybody, and he's wary of their motives. He knows that my motive is not to screw him or to screw you or to screw anybody else. My motive is to do what I think is the right thing to do. And so while he may disagree with it, I think he doesn't get mad at me because he understands what my motive is.
Yeah, that sounds completely fair, completely reasonable. You've been backstage for many of the biggest ever UFC events. Do you have any backstage Dana stories that maybe people haven't heard? Something that you've seen happen that you can repeat?
Well, this is an interesting thing, just, back in the day. So this was at a Chuck Liddell fight. Chuck was in the main event, and I can't remember who Chuck fought, but Chuck won the fight. So what they used to do back in the day, I was at the newspaper, and this happened in boxing too. The PR people, because I was, like especially at the events in Las Vegas, I was like the local hometown guy. They wanted the story in the paper the next day to be as complete and accurate as possible. So they used to allow me, and I was the only one. I would go to the locker room and interview usually the winning fighter afterwards, right? So I would go back. PR person would come and get me. I would run in the back, get an interview with whoever the winning fighter was, and send in my story. And so that was back in the day. Well, Dana and Chuck were obviously very close, but I went back after this particular thing, and I see Dana, and I figured, well, I might as well get Dana in addition to Chuck. And I see Dana with every single one of the fighters, and the winners and the losers, and he's embracing them. And you hear him talking to them, and like, he can be harsh in his opinions and everything, but like I was really amazed at how compassionate he was toward the people who lost, and how excited he was, like people who had good wins and everything. Hey, I'm proud of you. I'm happy for you. And then I asked him a couple of questions about Chuck, and he gave me some really good, interesting stuff. So just seeing kind of the human part of him, aside from the professional promoter part of him, was an interesting experience.
Yeah, I don't think that gets shown enough, right? Because most of the time that he's seen, it's being interviewed, uh, not necessarily how he's talking to people off camera and so on,
Right.
right? Yeah. In regards to Power Slap, do you think Power Slap could be a billion-dollar company completely off the back of social media virality?
Let me see if I can find this. Possibly. I don't know, like, I'm not seeing their numbers. I know they get great social media numbers. So when I started, I didn't cover the first couple Power Slaps. So let me start. I keep yakking so long here. So
It's
if I'm
perfect.
going too long, you can stop me. But when I was still at Yahoo and Power Slap came in, before they had an actual event, they did a test show in Vegas,
Mm.
and they invited Las Vegas media only. And we were there just to observe, and we were asked not to write about it, not to talk about it, but they wanted to know what we thought, right? And I think it was myself, Brett Okamoto, John Morgan, Ken Hathaway, who was with MMA Junkie, Oscar Willis, who works for the Mac Life. There might have been one or two others, but that was the bulk of the crew, that was there. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, this is stupid as freaking shit. Like, what the hell is this? And there was, I want to say there was like 12 or 15 fights that we were going to sit through. And I left after about 8 or 9, right? I'm like, get the hell out of here, and I left. And everybody was laughing at me when I left, right? Then, they went a long period of time before they had their first show. And so some of the things that I complained about, they actually fixed,
Okay.
and the fighters didn't know how to slap. But then even when it started, I didn't cover the first number of shows. And the reason I didn't is I thought, what is the sport in a guy sticking on his chin and getting whacked? Where is the sport in that? And I still ask myself that question a little bit. I have to admit, I still ask myself that question a little bit.
It's a fair question.
But having said that, I ended up, as I'm seeing people were into it, and I'm at Yahoo, and one of my jobs is, in combat sports, write about what people are interested in. And I'm looking on their TikTok page, and 200 million views on a thing. I'm like, what the hell? Where's this coming from? And so I called a bunch of and let me back up. Before I even called a bunch of doctors, one of the doctors from the Nevada Athletic Commission, who tends to the fighters, saw me at a MMA event and said, "Why aren't you covering Power Slap?" And I said, "Are you crazy? This is nuts." And he goes, "It's not as bad as boxing, or not as bad as MMA or boxing." And his point was, they're getting one hit with an open palm. They're not getting hit in training. And we know that that's a big problem in boxing. Fighters in training, they're getting injuries and they go into fights sometimes with head damage that's undetected and just getting hit over and over and over. So he said they're taking a maximum of, 1 to 5 slaps, 5 slaps if it's a title fight, 1 to 3 if it's a non-title fight, and, blah, 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 blah. So I called a bunch of other doctors, and the doctors said, hey, we're not in favor of any combat sport, right? Like if we're going to say be safe brain, but this is not as bad as these other sports, right? So then I said, okay, maybe I will go to cover one. So yeah, so now here is this video. This is I want to make sure this is the right one. Yeah, this is the one. Okay, so I have this slap video right here, and if I click View Insights, at the time I had a little bit less than 4,000 followers on Instagram, and this was the first slap show I covered, and I put it up, and if you look, 1.8 million views.
Yeah.
So I had 3,500, 4,000 followers, and I take a video and I put it on Instagram and I get 1.8 million views. That said to me, if little old me with, 3,000 some, Instagram followers can get that kind of traffic, so that told me people were interested in it. So I have learned, and if you've seen the most recent power slaps, I'm doing less writing about it and more, trying to do more video, because people aren't looking to read power slap, right? I am trying to do a business where I'm trying to get people to see my site, and I want them to read my work. And if I can get a slice of that 1.8 million people who watched my video to come to my site, I'm helping myself. And so, I get all these people that, they can, just tell me how I'm a sellout and everything else, but let them put them in their business and let them get laid off from their job and start a new job and have to try to attract people and, and whatnot, and see how it works. Right. And so, if I thought, like, I have covered boxing for, I was in college. I had a full-time job at a newspaper, and I was in college, and it wasn't my full-time beat at the beginning, but I was covering boxing. And I have been ringside for 7 fighters who died. And I've covered countless others who passed that, that I, wasn't at the fight, but they died in fights, and I had to write about them. I haven't seen anybody get seriously injured in a power slap show. Now, we'll see. It's early on in their existence, but that's a long way to get into answering your question. But I think, yes, can it become big off of just, the video clips? I think so, because here's the thing. You can see the whole fight basically in 12 seconds, know, and
it's easy for people to understand. It's like the 2 cartoon characters taking it in turns to punch each other until one of them dies, right?
like you're in boxing and it's, it's a great fight, and, the knockout might come in the 11th round, and, all this that leads up to it. But in power slap, you see the whole thing, boom, and it's over, right? And, the young people are into that immediacy. And I think that's something that can't be underestimated, right? So, I look at it and I say, hey, and I talk to the fighters, and I've said, and the fighters will tell you, I've said to them, why are you doing this? And and I've written that, and I've talked about that. So, I think that, they obviously already have a very successful business. And with the smart people they have running it, I think it's going to be even more successful. To put a dollar value on it, I know Dana says $1 billion, and Hunter Campbell says $1 billion. We'll see if that happens, right? But the business, they are doing great, believe me.
What do you think the ceiling is for them in terms of getting people to actually attend? Because they're doing huge numbers on social media, but do you think they could? I think the way for them to really scale it, and I'd like to get your opinion, is celebrities. Because to get 2 celebrities who kind of have a bit of beef with each other to do a boxing match together, you have to do a training camp, you have to learn skills, you need to learn footwork. There's a whole thing to it. You don't have to get in shape to take it in turns to slap each other a few times. And I think if they start leveraging that more, because then people will get behind the story, I think for them that would fast track things. Do you have it? What do you think about that?
I'm not sure about that, because I
No,
think they're doing pretty good as it is. And I think
true.
you run into regulatory issues, with celebrities, getting into the thing. Um, and I think, hey, look, the fighters do train. Now, they don't train like boxers, right? They're training their neck and to be able to, take blows and get, and absorb those blows that way. But they do train. Like you and I walking off the street, if we went in and got one of these guys whacking us, and I'll also say this, going back to when I walked out on it, right? I mean, that show, and maybe I'm on an island here, but that was legitimately horrible. That was really bad.
What was horrible about it?
And because the fighters didn't know the rules, the commission needed to redo. They were in the process of writing the rules at the time, right?
Okay.
And so this, and they're missing slaps, and it was just like so now the athletes, they call it a bob, it's a little thing of a person that they can hit, and they slap it, and they're learning to, get their technique and where to hit and not have fouls. And, people were flinching a lot, then, and that type of thing. And it just made it like it ruined any flow. But like, is power slap my favorite thing? No. But like, what was it? Power Slap 6. I had a great time that night. There was Tom Brady was there. There was a lot of famous people. Like, I'm not big into pop culture, so a lot of these people, someone would go and here, this guy's here and this guy's here, and I never heard of them. Like, I didn't know who they were. Who's the dude that was live streaming it on Instagram? That he does he's a rapper and he has sneakers. That's a
That
friend of.
doesn't narrow it down too much.
Yeah. He has those Nike sneakers that he sells that are expensive.
I don't know.
I forget who it is now. But in any event, he was there and everybody was going, oh my, and I never heard, that was the first I ever heard of the guy. And I remember him so much that, my, I'm going to just look up my story while I can talk about it. But I actually had a good time at the show because I'm watching it and I'm going, the fan, like the fighters, like were yelling at the audience, like the fans were having, craziness with some of the fighters. Travis Scott, that's who I'm talking about. Travis Scott.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, there was like one fan in particular who had bet, he clearly had bet all the fights. So he was yelling at the guy. So the guy, he had bet against, they were having like, and it was funny to watch this. Like, you never see the athletes engaging with the crowd. And here they're like, yelling, they're feet apart and they're yelling at each other. And so it was, I had a fun time, right? Is this something like you had asked me before, would I go to the fights after I retire? Boxing and MMA, definitely yes. This probably no, but I'm not like, so it,
Maybe. I am. It reminds me of early UFC, right? The rules weren't quite defined yet.
right,
People like Big John McCarthy and others got together to kind of shape something that could be more like a sport.
right.
Sounds like a similar journey.
Yeah, I mean, and the rules are getting better each time out, and like they allowed. It used to be, and that was another thing on the safety factor. They're not allowed to pivot, and they're still not allowed to do that. But they can move their foot a little bit now, where they weren't able to force. So when the person's slapping, his or her feet had to be flat on the ground, right? And then they would throw the slap. So that they're not putting as much force into it as a boxer or an MMA fighter would, as they turn into a blow, and they have their body turning into it, like a golfer turning into a drive. And so that
Yeah.
that is a factor. Now they made the rules a little bit more lenient in letting the person step a little bit. And I'm still not 100% certain I understand. Like the last show, I'm going, that's got to be a foul. Their foot movement. Nope, no foul.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they are tweaking the rules constantly, and the show itself, if you just watch it, is like a better show.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to UFC, an area that I know a lot more about, and I'm sure you do as well. UFC 305 this weekend. How is this event not happening in Johannesburg? Dana always said you need a champion to launch a new country. Well, tonight he has a champion from South Africa fighting a former champion from Nigeria. Seemed to me the perfect event to launch in South Africa.
Yeah,
What do you think happened there?
well, they've been trying to get into Africa, for a while. So it's not just this show. When they had Usman, Adesanya, and Ngannou as champions, all from Africa. That was a big thing. They were those three were referred to as the Three Kings, and they were trying to have a show there. I think there's a lot that goes into the putting on these shows in any venue wherever it is, and they haven't found the right deal, both the financial deal to bring the show there, and then also the right venue. Like they wanted to be in Spain for Ilia Toporia's fight.
That's another one that was
They
just
really
blown.
wanted to be in Spain, and they
Yeah.
weren't able to work a deal out to get something in. I know that they will be in Spain. If I had to guess, I think they're going to be in Spain and in Africa in 2025. That's a guess, but and of course, if Topuria loses to Max Holloway in Abu Dhabi of all places for these two guys, what connection do they have to Abu Dhabi? But if those two, if Max wins that fight, then I think Spain would kind of be on the back burner for even a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean that stadium in Madrid, the Bernabeu, Real Madrid Stadium, it would have been phenomenal to do the event there. He's a Real Madrid fan. He got introduced to the crowd at the Real Madrid match when he won the title and held it up. It felt like everything was set up, and then either they couldn't get the deal done or they just didn't feel the
Right.
timing was right. It's a shame. Um, Speaking of the fight tonight with Dricus and Izzy, who do you like in that fight? Are you prepared to stick your neck on the line and have a prediction, or do you don't want to offend the fighters?
I'm on the fence a little bit in this, but I kind of lean toward Izzy in the fight, and I think it's a grudge match, and Izzy is such a great counterpuncher in grudge matches, and you think the other guy, and Dricus is an attacking type fighter, right? I can just see Dricus getting caught by some counter. Izzy looks in phenomenal shape. If you've seen his body, I think he's in better condition, and I think the time off helped him. He claims no that being as active did not impact him negatively, but I think it did. And not only is he fighting, like if you're fighting five guys in what was it, 17 months, if I'm not mistaken, that he had. But he's not just fighting guys on the card, in the middle of the roster. He's fighting the guys in the top of the top 10,
Yeah,
not in the top 10 of the middleweights, in the top 10 in the world.
yeah,
Because he was, so you think about it. Alex Pereira is what most people have number 2 or number 3 pound for pound now. He fought Alex Pereira in that and there, and all these guys that he fought that are ranked right up there.
yeah,
Um, that really is difficult to do, and that puts your body through such a toll. And I think you need to have a little bit of a break. So I think the break has done Izzy good. He's been off 11 months. He looks refreshed, and I think stylistically, with Dricus going at him and Dricus going that Izzy will catch him with something. But I think the beauty of this main event is that, you can make a case for Dricus just as easily as you can for Izzy. So those are the best fights to watch, right? Where
yeah,
you say, I think this guy is going to win, but you don't really know.
yeah. I agree. I think Izzy wins because Izzy seems to do well when he's angry, like when he's fired up. Like if he kind of has a good rapport with the guy, like when he last fought, the name escapes me of the person he just when he lost the title in his last fight in
Oh,
Australia.
Strickland?
Yeah, he didn't. He seemed like kind of jovial, like he kind of liked the guy. Like it wasn't like he wasn't that kind of angry like obsession. But when he fought people like Paulo Costa, Piera, he had that kind of intensity that I see now. And like you said, I think with the break, I think he wins. I think he wins by decision. How do you think he wins?
Yeah, I think he might stop him, but
Yeah.
and when you think about it, like think of what Izzy was going through on those. He was the star. Paulo Costa, limited English. So with, the English media is their largest media.
Hmm.
Paulo is difficult to, get out there. Izzy's carrying those shows, right? In Australia, Strickland certainly, carried that, and but Izzy did a lot of work too on that show, right? But so he not only did he have the responsibility of fighting the absolute best guys in the world, but he's also the one primarily selling the show.
Yeah,
And I don't
yeah,
think
yeah.
the
So the
public
media obligations just so much, right?
like I'll tell you this, right? So sometimes, I'll do an interview with somebody on say a random fight night, right? And that the main event person I'll be talking to, whoever it might be, I might be the 12th out of 20 people that they're talking to, and they're doing 12 or 15-minute interviews with everybody, and so they go from one to the other to the other to the other, and while everybody has a different style and maybe a few different questions, a lot of the questions are the same, and so that like, so then when you can see some guy, they're tired of it, right? And that's just in a fight night card. Now on a main, and they promote those shows just primarily week of. But on a pay-per-view, they're trying to sell the pay-per-views, and that's week out, and they have press conferences and appearances and all sorts of stuff, and it's just amplified way more. And when you're a star like Conor McGregor, when you're a star like Ronda Rousey, when you're a star like Israel Adesanya, or I guess John Anik is now saying that how is he saying it? Adesanya. He's got a different
Adesanya.
pronunciation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of Adesanya, we've been calling him Adesanya all the time. Now this week he's been calling him
I think
Adesanya.
Ariel was the one that obsessed with changing the pronunciation for everybody. Adesanya.
So yeah. So in any event, we'll see what they call him in the show tonight. But in any event, I'll just call him Izzy. Izzy did a lot of work on all those shows, and that takes a toll too. There's a mental pressure. Your time is not your own. On those weeks, and so you have a
Yeah,
lot
tough
to get
schedule.
done, and on two different things.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, Judging in MMA, what is your opinion on it? Do you think it needs to be changed, or do we just need better judges for the system that we already have, the 10-9 must system?
Yeah, I think better judges has really, improved the quality of the judges.
Former
I
fighters,
Yeah,
or
I don't, I don't ascribe to the theory that you have to be a former fighter, to understand. Like, I think you need to train judges just like you train, fighters. Go through the amateur system, judge a lot of fights. They're going to make mistakes let them make it on the learning fights, and let them make it on the way up. So
yeah,
when they get to the the big shows, you're judging a MMA, UFC show, or a PFL show, a Bellator show, that you're talking about the best judges are there, and that they've had a lot of experience. I think clarifying the scoring criteria is also really good. I also want to say this, and I wrote a piece on this a while ago, Simon, and I think people were influenced a tremendous amount by the announcers, and that sometimes good, sometimes bad,
hmm,
and I remember it was I think it was UFC 104, and who was in the main event of that? It was Lyoto Machida, and Shogun. Lyoto, and they fought in L.A. And I just remember, all the public thought that Shogun won the fight, and most of the media ringside thought that Machida won the fight, and it was a closely scored fight. Well, I watched the fight later, and I had the benefit of watching it multiple times, and so I wrote a story on this. Like, there was at one point Shogun throws an elbow, right? And Machida ducks. And when you watch, the elbow is like up here, the arm is up here, and just barely missed the top of the head. Rogan goes, "Oh, Shogun with a huge elbow." But what happened is Machida was going through. Machida hit him with a little shot inside. So Machida scored, Hua missed, and yet on the broadcast, and when you're seeing that live, it's hard to,
yeah,
sometimes, see what happened. So we blame the judges. Oh, they don't know what's going on because the announcers are saying a certain thing, right?
Mm.
And when you're announcing, and I will say when you're a reporter, right? We're tweeting about the fight. So I'm trying to write a tweet and I look at my screen and the crowd yells. I look at what happened. If you do that, you cannot accurately score the fight, right? The three judges sitting around there are never taking their eye off what's the action in the ring. Now, I'll also tell you, especially at a UFC show, we are really close. If you're on the floor, we're
Mm-hmm.
really close to the cage, right? But that doesn't mean that you have a great sight.
Especially on
So,
the ground, you can't see what's happening on the ground
right,
very clearly.
I
You get
have
one angle. That's it.
right. Sometimes they have the in the pad where the advertisements are when they back up.
Yeah.
Those are wide. And if they're fighting right there, I might be looking right through that pad. I can't see, did the punch land? You might think the punch landed. Did it land? As you say, are they on the ground? Sometimes the referee is in front of you, right? The referee has his back to the cage,
Yeah.
and you're trying to look around the referee. And so a lot of times I've had people say to me on social media, man, you suck. You're not even watching the fight, because they see me and I'm looking like this because I'm watching the screen, because you can't, or ESPN has cameramen that walk around the ring, right? They have the people stationed up,
Yeah.
but they also have, and the cameraman has a wire guy who is holding, the wires. So they're standing in front of you, and they're literally, I could grab them by the back. So I have on occasion taken pictures of that guy, like standing in front of me, and I posted saying, so for all you wise guys who want to tell me that I don't know what's going on, try to score the fight with these two guys standing in front of you, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, that's kind of the stuff that happens. But that's, explaining my scoring.
Yeah.
The judges scoring, but the judges still have some of that issue. The ref in front of them, maybe even, one fighter's backed up to the cage and they're fighting inside. Does this punch? So that's why they have the judges on different sides of the octagon. But I think, clarifying the scoring criteria has been a big help in improving the judges, and then just training the judges better what to look for. And I think that, I think it's gotten a lot better. It's certainly not perfect right now, but it has gotten significantly better. In California, Andy Foster has, and he's invited me to go on and do this. He'll have judges come on and they watch rounds that from the past, and then they score. They each person will score the round, and then they talk about it. Why did I score it the way I did, and all the difficulties, and and scoring these rounds. And I think by commissions doing those kind of things, that's going to make, it's a slow process and we wish it was faster, but
Yeah.
I think it's just like, and other sports, if you look at it where instant replay is in now, and in the United States and Major League Baseball and NFL, two hugely popular sports, NBA as well, replay has shown these referees are pretty good and they get it right most of the time.
Yeah.
They occasionally miss, but they get it right. And I think that we're getting to that point in MMA. They're not always right. And MMA is more subjective than, like in a, is he inbounds or out of bounds, right? You can look at it and it's black and white. Is he in or is he out?
Yeah.
That,
The line
MMA
is the line.
right. It's more subjective in MMA, but I think we're seeing the improvements coming. It's not where it needs to be yet, but I think it's getting there.
Okay. Boxing. I read that you wrote on, this is 9 months ago for Yahoo Sports, and you were talking about the Saudi money and the impact that's having. And you said it's helping make the big fights, but it spells trouble for boxing's future in the US. Since then, they've now come over to the US and they did that event just recently. How has your opinion changed, if it has, since then? And do you think the Saudis' influence overall is a net positive or net negative?
Um, my opinion hasn't changed because they've done one card in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
And it was a disaster. It sold no pay-per-views. It lost 8 figures in terms of money. I mean, it was really bad.
Is that
Um,
because of it being Terence Crawford, or is that because it's what do you put that down
I
to?
think there was
Because
a little. Well, first of all, they had, I think Eddie Hearn is a genius. I think he's a brilliant guy. But Eddie Hearn does not know the U.S. market, and especially the L.A. market, right?
Hmm.
Like some other promoters. And each market is unique. And I think an American promoter would have done it. Like, I think Eddie is more creative and better pretty now than most of the American promoters. But I think a show in the United States, when you're trying to attract people to come out, you need to have somebody that knows the American market. Eminem, certainly, they paid $10 million for Eminem to be at the show. Eminem was not the act for that market, right? Believe me, it was not the act for that market. And the time the event started, right? The audience for that show was going to be a very, Mexican American audience, right? And those people tend to work blue collar jobs, and they work on weekends, and they tend to be working until 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And the show started at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when those people were working.
Right.
And look at the crowd. Like, now, if you watch that show in the opening shot, at least on the DAZN broadcast, Sean Porter and Kate Abdul were standing there, and Sean Porter says, because obviously they were told to talk up the big crowd, we got a sellout crowd. Well, number one, that you can see there's no. Kate Abdul said, "Well, we don't have to go that far, Sean. There was nobody there. There was literally nobody there, and I mean empty, like less than 1,000 people." And
Yeah.
it held, what was it, like 20? It held 28,000 in the stands, and I think whatever it was on the floor. So it held a lot of people. Then they gave away tickets, and they gave away scores of tickets. I talked to people at a bunch of LA gyms, and this is kind of a crazy thing that happened. So the ticket prices were way too high because it was going to be a blue collar crowd buying that. Like Las Vegas, you can have those kind of ticket prices because you're going to get, casino customers. In Los Angeles, at a show of that ilk, you're going to get, the blue collar crowd. The tickets were way overpriced. They weren't selling at all. Tuesday or Wednesday of fight week, they lowered them by more than 50%. They started
Really?
to sell a little bit of tickets, right? Now they've given away thousands of tickets. I think it turned out there was a club report the California Commission released. 20% of the tickets were given away, and of the 80% that weren't given away, some of the tickets were given away, but they're considered sold if the promoter pays the tax on them. So in the U.S., if the promoter pays the state tax, because all the commission cares about, the commission is there for two things: to collect its tax money and to ensure the safety of the fighters. Those are the two issues that they're there for, right?
Okay.
So if they get their tax money, if a ticket's $1,000 ticket and whatever their tax on the is, they want to collect that money for that ticket. So the promoter can do whatever he wants with the ticket after he pays the tax because it's a paid for ticket, right?
So if he gives the ticket away for free, does he still have to pay the tax?
That you can get, so they can give you two tickets that they have paid the tax for.
Right.
And it shows as a sold ticket on the club report.
Okay.
But not a comp. But they also have comps, which they just give away, and there's no charge on those, right?
Yeah.
So they're two separate things. So the issue there becomes like, you hear, hey, this fight had a $20 million gate. Well, a theoretical $20 million gate if, somebody put down money for all those tickets. But the money was not put down for all those tickets, right?
You just gave them away.
And you gave them away. And
or at least
now,
discounted.
Like I remember one time, this was a Don King show at Caesar's Palace, and it was toward the end of Caesar's Palace's run as a big boxing venue. And David Reed fought Felix Trinidad on a Friday night, and they had it outside, and they were selling tickets. They had a ticket booth outside near the swimming pool. It was so my brother. This fight was in Las Vegas. My brother lived in Pittsburgh, and he was in Las Vegas on business. And up to this point, I hadn't even seen him yet, right? So he texted me and said, "I get off work. I'm going to come and buy a ticket to the show." So I see him the night of, and he says to me, "I went to the ticket booth to buy a ticket to watch the show, and the guy at the ticket booth said, there's a guy over there that works for Don King right there giving away free tickets because the show is on TV and there's nobody buying tickets and they want to get it filled up. I could sell you a ticket but you'll get a better ticket from that guy over there, and you won't have to pay for it. So my brother got a comp ticket to a show that he was willing to pay for a ticket, so that it made it look good on television,
Yeah.
right? You know, I wish he were here with me. He passed away years ago, but that is example of some of the stuff that happens. So that show, Simon, in LA did really poorly. So my larger point, if you're putting all the big fights in Riyadh, or in the case of the U.S. in Riyadh and London, it's inaccessible for people here. And, it used to be back in the day that fights, would be held in the afternoon and people were used to going. But now it's changed and they're used to going at night and not going in the day. And so their days are filled with family activities, going to the beach, going to, whatever you do with your family on a Saturday afternoon in the United States. And now you're putting on fights that are, starting at, from Riyadh at 8 in the morning in Las Vegas, right?
Yeah.
And go till 3 in the afternoon. People aren't seeing those shows. They're working, they're doing their thing. So I still stand by. Now, getting the big fights made is a positive. And so but the promoters, I think the concern that I have is the promoters rely on the money and they're just looking for one big score. That's the problem with boxing promoters, right? If I would say the biggest difference between the UFC and the way Dana White runs the UFC and most boxing promoters is most boxing promoters are looking for a score on one big night, and we did it. Whereas the UFC is looking to build a long-term, thriving, growing business. And that's what they do. And so they are not thinking short-term ever. They think long-term always. And the boxing promoters, they're not doing that. And so they say, hey, I can, get Turkey to give me some of his money and I can put a big show on, or what they think is a big show, not promote it, right? If you don't go to Riyadh too, so all the shows that were in Riyadh, if you were in the U.S., shows anywhere else in the world, the U.S. media here can get those people. When they're in Riyadh, we cannot. So we're relying on, streams online of press conferences that it might happen at midnight our time, or some kind of crazy time,
So it's tough to
or
report.
quotes that the promoter sends out.
Yeah. Have you been, and would you go?
I have never been to. I have been everywhere in the world, but I've never been to Saudi. So,
No.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have any objection to going to Saudi. It's like for my business now, I'm sitting here and I have to make a calculation what I'm going to spend to get to Saudi Arabia and to stay in Saudi Arabia and to feed myself in Saudi Arabia. Is it worth the traffic I'm going to get on the site?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why I'm not in Australia today, right?
Yeah.
Because I made the determination that expense of me flying 20 hours to get to Perth. I've been in Australia before to cover fights.
Yeah.
But that 20-hour flight for me to get there from Las Vegas and to stay there for however long I do is going to be prohibitive, and I'm not going to be able to, recoup that right now with the amount of traffic that I get. My traffic, like when I look at my traffic on a day-to-day basis, it's like this, right? But when I look at it on the, I've been just past my 6-month anniversary. I'm coming up on 7, my traffic is like that. So my traffic is going in the right direction. It might be, something where next year, hey, I can go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're focused more right now on building, and those kind of trips are kind of on the back burner for the minute, right? Until you can until it becomes more viable.
And I am sure that I could probably get somebody to pay for me to go, but I have, and I know that different cultures do it differently. I have never done that, right? So if I go to a show anywhere in the world ever in my life up until this day, I've paid for it, or my company that I work for has paid for it. So, since I've been at Yahoo, since I've been at keviniole.com, I covered UFC 297 in Toronto. Kevin paid for it. UFC 298 in Anaheim. Kevin paid for it. UFC 299 in Miami, Kevin paid for it. 300 was in Vegas. I live in Vegas. 301 was Brazil. I didn't go to that. Where was 302? I don't remember 302. 303 was here. So, 302 was New Jersey. I didn't go to New Jersey. So, I have paid for the shows I've gone. I am now rethinking that, to be honest with you. I haven't made the decision that I'm going to do that, but a lot of people are like, a lot of my peers are taking those free trips. And it's making
What's the
me,
downside to that?
because the downside is journalism. Now I owe somebody, something. If, hey, write this.
Hmm.
I'm going to write. I want people to know I write what I believe, rightly or wrongly, smartly or stupidly. It's my opinion. It's what I see. It's what I know. I may be a dumb effer that people call me, right? But it's what I think. But now, if I go to the show and somebody pays for me to go, do they question my motivation? Are you writing what you? If I say it's a great show now, that's because I believe it's a good show. If I say the show sucks, it's because I believe the show sucks. But if somebody pays for me to go to their show and I say it sucks or it's great, do they believe me?
Yeah, and if you say it sucks, are they going to invite you again? So the whole thing becomes counterproductive, right?
So you just look at it like, I have started to think about it because I'm saying, well, I've been in this business, since I had a full-time job since I'm 19, so over 40 years. Um, is my reputation enough? There's some people you're never going to convince. And
Hmm.
I've thought about doing it. Like most of the British media corps does it,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So, do I change? I don't know. So I haven't made that decision yet.
Okay. Okay. Couple quick fire questions. Feel free to expand as much or as little as you wish. In your opinion, the biggest MMA fight that never happened but should have?
Um, Fedor versus it would either be Randy Couture or Brock Lesnar, and I guess I'll say Randy because Randy was a Hall of Famer, an established brand. Brock was held back because of his physical ailments that he had, the diverticulitis and all the
Hmm.
different physical ailments he had. I mean, at that one time when they were talking about Fedor fighting Brock, Fedor was probably past his prime a little bit at that point. But I think, Randy and Fedor in 2005 or 2006 would have been a huge show.
Yeah. For me, it has to be George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. Like I was just dreaming about that fight,
Big
and it's
fight, but they're different weight classes, and George was never big
but
enough.
but then George went up and beat Bisping for the same belt that he Anderson Silva was defending. So
I don't want
it
to
makes
sound
it
like Dana because I'm more into guys moving up than Dana tends to be. But the
yeah
only argument I would say there is remember what George did, right? That fight was held in November, and he didn't fight for a long time so that he could build his body up. That was 2017. I'm not
mm,
remembering the time, but he was he had been retired since 2013. But when they announced the fight, it had been months in advance so that he could build his body up.
yeah
So it wasn't like during the run of his welterweight reign that he could have fought, in May and then said, okay, I'm going to come back in November and fight at middleweight and go up. That's not how George was.
yeah fair enough. Um, Based on current form, who do you think wins if Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury have a boxing match?
Fury. I think Fury.
You still think Fury?
I think Fury's a better boxer, and I think that's the difference. Fury has a really good chin. His last two fights, right? The Usyk fight he lost. I don't want to dog Usyk because Usyk beat Joshua twice, right? And so Usyk has now got 2 wins over Joshua and a win over Fury. But you look and he's coming off the Ngannou fight where he looked terrible, and then the Usyk fight where he almost got stopped.
Yeah.
Probably. But I think Fury, a motivated Fury, an on point Fury. I think his boxing skill. It would be a fun fight, but I think his boxing skills would be the difference in the outcome.
Do you think that fight happens?
Yes.
regardless. You think it still does? Yeah.
I think it happened if Fury loses. Let's say Fury loses to Usyk again. I think it's 50-50 that he might retire.
Yeah.
At that point, I think, he'll look at it. What's the, I'm, not going to get another shot at the title. I'm mid 30s, but if Fury wins for the title, I think for sure he will fight Joshua.
Okay. Who do you fancy in the rematch? Usyk, Fury.
I picked Usyk the first time
Yeah.
to win the fight. And as I'm thinking of this rematch, I'm going, who could raise their game up more, right? And it was a close fight, even though I thought, Usyk won. It
Me
was a
too.
close fight. I might lean toward Fury. I still
Yeah.
want to give myself, time before I make it. But as I sit here today on August 17th, talking to you, Simon, I guess I would say I would lean toward Fury at this point.
Okay. Which MMA fight in all the ones that you've watched or attended were you the most excited about, most looking forward to?
Going into the fight,
Yeah. Just like,
um,
man, I can't wait for this fight. Like the anticipation, the build up.
it had to be a Justin Gaethje fight, and I guess I'm going to say Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway because um, UFC 300, that card was shaping up really good, and you kept looking at that fight on the card, going, it's a challenge for Max moving from featherweight
Mhm.
to lightweight, but Max throws so many punches, and he's such an accurate puncher, and Gaethje's going to be attacking him and coming to him, and you could just see how that fight, was going to be so good, right? And so, that was one that I thought that, I was really, really excited for. So I would say that fight would have probably been the one that I think of, that got me going. Back in the day, there was one that you might laugh at when I say this, and Frank Trigg versus Matt Hughes, the rematch, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And because there was so much bad blood, and Matt Hughes was like the biggest star at that point, or maybe co-biggest star with Randy
Yeah. He went
Couture
on a huge
and Chuck.
run that people don't talk about.
Yeah, and Matt and Chuck and Randy were kind of like the faces of the sport at that period of time. And Trigg was a good fighter, and they had a huge rivalry and everything, and so that was something that I guess I would say, that fight was like a one I really couldn't wait. That was like a big fight in those days. And I remember thinking, boy, this is going to be fun to see what happens. And as it turned out, remember that finish when Trigg hit him low and Matt looked like he was going to lose the title. And then he pops up and walks Trigg across. And I think to this day, that slam that got put down, right? When he slammed Trigg, the crowd's eruption. I don't know that I've ever heard a bigger roar than that particular night.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. You were so. Yeah, it's interesting because you get the perspective of being at all these shows as well, which obviously gives you a whole different like memory of the event. Most of these I've only obviously seen on TV, but for me, it was George St. Pierre versus Michael Bisping, just to see what would happen after the layoff, going up a weight class. So many questions. Like I was so excited for that, and then obviously maybe Conor versus Aldo, just because of the build up.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
another one that the Conor versus Aldo, because like you say, and especially like the Ireland press conference, right?
yeah,
Because that was so crazy, like that Irish press conference, and everything when he stole the belt and and that whole thing went crazy. Yeah,
yeah.
that was
The
really
build
an
up was
amazing one.
phenomenal.
That was amazing too.
Um, Same question for boxing. The fight you were most looking forward to.
Tyson Holyfield 2. So
Good,
I
good
covered
answer.
Tyson Holyfield 1,
Yeah.
and Holyfield was perceived to be shot at that point, and Tyson was perceived to be at the top. And I remember I mentioned Royce Fuhr before. That week, we got assigned. He covered Tyson exclusively, and I covered Holyfield exclusively. And I
Okay.
remember on Friday afternoon, he and I were driving to the weigh-in, and I said to him, I picked Tyson, but as I'm around Holyfield all week, I'm starting to think he believes he can win, and he's starting to make me think, I believe he can win. Of course, I never changed my official prediction, so I went into that with Tyson. But Holyfield just pretty much dominated that fight and knocked him out. And then the rematch came, and now it's the big heavyweight fight that everybody was couldn't wait to see and everything. And so there were so many other great fights over the years. But the going into that, De La Hoya Mayweather was huge. That was one that I'm like, wow, I can't wait to see this. And Pryor and Arguello too was a fight that was like, oh man, because the first fight was one of the all-time classics. But there's something special when you have two great heavyweights, and they had a good fight before. And Tyson's persona was such. What a night that was. I mean, I have so many stories from the bite fight night. I should have written a book. My friend George Willis wrote a book about that night. But what a crazy night that was.
So where were you when that happened? You're ringside, or where are you?
I was in the front row. It was,
Yeah.
I was sitting. I mentioned Jim Murray before, who I consider the greatest sports writer of all time. To me, it was like I was sitting next to the god of sports writing, and I was just like, I could not believe I'm sitting next to Jim Murray. And when Holyfield, the first time when Mike bit him, we don't have TV announcers around us. We can't hear what's being said. We're watching the screen, and they're fighting in close, and all of a sudden Holyfield's jumping up and down, and I'm going like, what the hell is happening?
It's like checking his ear.
And I thought maybe he had gotten punched low, and he was like reacting to being punched low. And then all of a sudden you started hearing people say, he bit him, and like we're like, what? That was like the last thing we were thinking about. So yeah, that was like, that whole night. But I was in the first row right there. And I mean, then there was like all kind of crazy stuff happened that night, and then not the least of which, Hall of Famer Bob Sheridan was announcing the international broadcast, and he had health problems. And so while all the nuttiness is going on after the bite has happened, and there's things, all of a sudden I look to my right and I see there's a stretcher, and they're carrying Bob Sheridan. He had a heart attack at ringside.
Oh.
As the fight is going on, and they're carrying Sheridan out on a stretcher, and like all these people are rushing toward the ring, and here's people with Sheridan on a stretcher
out
trying to get him out. And it was like, oh my God, it was like, it was so wild. And in the casino that night, it was crazy. And I mean,
yeah,
I have a lot of good stories of that night.
Were you there? I think you were, from memory. Were you there for the Conor Khabib fight?
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. How would you compare those two? Because they kind of had crazy endings as well, right?
Yeah. Not quite the same in Conor and Khabib, because of, the fight ended normally. Like, so Khabib wins the fight ended normally.
It was a fair ending.
And it was just, Khabib jumping over the cage that started all the other stuff, going. That was zany too, but that also was in T-Mobile Arena, not connected to a casino. So like the Tyson Holyfield stuff, spilled out into the casino, right?
Right. I never thought about it like that before. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was like, we're downstairs, and we had a lot of people there covering the fight that night. I was the Holyfield Tyson. I was at the Review-Journal, and there was reports gunshots in the casino. So I run up to the casino to see what's going on, right?
In the MGM?
And MGM. And there was a lot of nuttiness, there was people turning over blackjack tables. There was, it turned out there weren't shots in the casino. A chandelier broke somehow, and that was what people thought was shots. There weren't shots in the casino. But like, I'm calling, so I had a cell phone. That was 1997. And I had one of those big shoe phone, cell phone things. And, but it didn't work inside back in the day. Right. And that was in the 90s. So it wasn't like there was great signal, back then. And, so I'm on a payphone, and it was like close to 2 a.m, and I'm calling the paper trying to get, because for people who don't know, and it still happens, but not as much as it used to back in the day, the paper deadline would be like, say, 10 o'clock, and the paper would start printing at 10:30 at night. But then you could stop the press run to put later updated news in. So like, say a sporting event ends after deadline, it may not make it for the early papers, but it would get in for the later papers. So this is such a compelling news story that of all the chaos that was going around, I'm calling and I'm talking to the city editor, who, was the person in charge of the news section of the paper, to get this information in. and I'm on a payphone, and there's like a bank of 5 payphones, and I'm on the next to the last. There's one payphone to my right, and that's it. And then on the farthest payphone on the left, there's a guy on the phone there, and I'm looking at this guy, and he's some kind of you know he's got a derby on, he's no shirt, but he got a million chains on, and he's got these white leather pants, and the reason I remember the pants is because I look, and sticking up out of the pants was a pistol out of his pants. And so I'm talking about all this lawlessness in the casino, and I look over and I see this dude here, right? And I haven't seen this guy do anything, so I don't want to accuse him of doing anything. But I see he's got a freaking gun in his pocket, and I'm talking about. So I said, and the editor, her name, she's now dead. Her name was Annette. I said, Annette, I have to call you from another phone, and it's like 10 to 2 in the morning, and they absolutely quit publishing at 2:10, no matter what. And she's like, no, don't hang up. And I go, I got to go to a different set of payphones. So I run to a different payphone. I call her up. And remember, then I needed change to call, right? It's not like you could just call, I have coins to put in the phone. So I call her from the other payphone, and she's mad at me, but she doesn't want to yell at me. And I go, there was a dude with a gun next to me, and I don't want to be talking to this guy with a gun, And so I wanted to be somewhere I was a little bit safer. So it was like, that night was just wild.
Wow. For me, the fight I most looked forward to, I think, is either that one or Ricky Hatton versus Mayweather, just because the build-up was so good, both undefeated, like you didn't know what was going to happen. What was that one like?
That was great because there's only one Ricky Hatton, and so we had all the singing, and it
Yeah.
was they weren't used to that in the U.S. so much of the fans coming over and singing and doing what they did. I remember Billy Graham was training Hatton, and I wrote a column, and I guess it came out on a Tuesday. And there's a public workout, and it was at the old UFC gym. So their old offices before they built where they are now, and they actually had an underground gym.
Yeah, under Lorenzo's hotel, right? Because
Yeah,
Hotel Casino.
and well, no, not under it was across the street from that, but yeah, but
Okay.
it was an underground gym, and so we're waiting to get in. The door was locked, and Billy Graham was there, and there was a bunch of the writers. We were all standing there waiting to get in, and Billy Graham's like, I heard somebody wrote a column, and it was ludicrous, and said Mayweather was going to totally outclass Rick, and I would smack that guy in the face if I saw him. And I said, well, that was me. And he like what, and he's like, and so he's in my face, and like, Billy Graham is, Ricky's going to do this, Ricky's going to do that. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see what happens, right? They're going to fight in a couple of days. And so after the fight was over, I walk into the press room, and so I'm in the first row of the audience, and I'm like right in line with the podium. And who was running that press conference? That would have been was that Bob? No, that wasn't Bob Arum. Richard Schaefer. Richard Schaefer standing at the podium, and Hatton team comes walking in, and I see Bill Graham, and our eyes meet, and I went like that, and he nodded at me,
It is what it is. I want to thank you so much for your time today, Kevin. I've really enjoyed the conversation. You mentioned earlier that you've had students. You kind of been teaching sports journalism. Is that something that you kind of actively promote? Can people get hold of you to learn from you and things like this?
Well, I'm, right now I've hired one intern, and I'm in the process of hiring, and he's a student at UNLV, and I'm in the process of hiring a second. I've interviewed one young man who is terrific, way overqualified. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hire him because of what he wants to do. I want to get somebody that can do something different than my other. So my other intern is in video production, and he actually worked for UFC Fight Pass before. He finished an internship with them, and I brought him on board, and he's with me now, and doing really good work. And I'm really proud of him, and going to work with him this year. So I want to get somebody that's more writer inclined. And the kid that I referenced, has been doing. He wants to get into video production and or video, be talent himself. And so, I kind of hired the other kid to do that. So, I don't know if I'm going to hire him. His name is Jonathan. He's really good. But yeah, so I want to have interns, so that I'm not in a position right now to pay these kids, so I'm doing it for college credit. And if
Hmm.
I could get somebody that is like into journalism that wants to do it, I would love to help because, I feel a debt to journalism, right? I've had a great career. I've traveled the world. I've covered multiple Olympics. I've seen a lot of different things, all these great fights that we're talking about. Met a lot of, met presidents of the United States and, just so many different, people that I've met by my job that I want to pay back to journalism if I can and help train, kids that are, going to be the next wave and have them be good and have them be positive, for the industry long after I'm gone. So,
Yeah.
so hopefully I'm going to hire one more intern and then I'll just be in a constant process of having one or two interns working for me as I go forward always.
Okay. How should people follow you? Where should they connect with you?
Get me on Facebook, Instagram at Kevin Iole. My YouTube channel is at Kevin Iole. I'm Kevin Kevini on X or Twitter, as I like to call it. Us
Yeah.
old folks refer to it as Twitter. And of course, my website is keviniole.com, KEVINIOLE.com.
Thanks very much for your time, Kevin.
All right, brother. I appreciate you. Thank you.